So when I was in like late junior high, I was getting interested in girls, of course, and I had this dilemma. That I had to think through, and the dilemma was, how am I going to decide of all of these options before me which girl I should date? And now you're probably wondering, okay, Chris, it would help if we pictured this a little bit better. So here's what eighth grade Chris looked like. Uh, so you can tell why I was really concerned how I was going to choose between all of the options that there would be, right? Okay, you can take that off the screen before too many photos are taken of it. So I had this great idea. My idea was, if I could create a system, like a scientific system for myself, then I would be able to decide with ease which girl I should date. So I got out a piece of paper and I started writing down like the things that were the most important to me for a girl. Now, of course, like every single one of these things was pretty much just about how she looked, because that apparently is how I thought as an eighth grader. So it'd be like, okay, I prefer this color hair, this color eye, it's like this height, all of these things. And so the way that I figured it could work is any girl that I was maybe interested in, I could run her through this list. And each thing like had a rating scale of 0 to 10. And so I could be like, okay, like on 0 to 10, the height is like a 6 out of 10. The eyes are like a 9 out of 10. And at the end, I could add up all the points together, and whichever girl came out with the most points, that of course would be the one that would make the most sense for me to date. Now, you may also be surprised to find out that I didn't get like a first serious girlfriend till late high school. But the point being, focus. Even at that early age, I was already trying to think through, like, how do I go about finding the right kind of person to date? That was already on my mind. And I went about it in the most terrible way, but I was thinking about it. And so as we continue this series on goals, we said we were going to spend 2 of the weeks focusing more on dating relationships. And last week, we kind of more specifically talked to the girls. And tonight, I want to talk to the guys. And at this point in my life, I went through the time where I was your guys' age. I saw the things my friends went through. I experienced the things I've gone through. I've been married for 6 years now. I've been doing student ministry for about 10 years, watching people your guys' age fail at the dating thing. I have friends who have been married and friends who have gotten divorced. And as I've looked at all of these things and gained this experience and perspective, it kind of leads me to this question of like, what should be the goals when it comes to relationships? And I know I said tonight that I want to specifically speak to the guys, but girls, don't check out for a couple reasons. One, like this is good stuff for you to listen to if I'm talking to guys about, what kind of girl should you be looking for, but also I'm going to be talking to guys about what kind of man should you be. And girls, like that's the person I want you guys to be looking for as well. So pay close attention to this. And I think this is important no matter where you're at on the spectrum. Maybe you're someone who is not in a dating relationship and being in one is the furthest thing from your mind. It's okay. One day you might be there, and this is important information to have thought about. Or maybe you're someone who is interested in dating, you're just not in a relationship yet. This is really, really important for you. Maybe you're in a relationship already and you have some things to consider. Wherever you're at, I think this is really important for us to talk about. And so to do that, I want to frame this conversation first. So there's this moment in Jesus' life that we read about where this teacher comes up to Jesus and he asks Jesus this question. He says, Jesus, of all the commandments, which is the most important? And so this dude, he wants to know, Jesus, when it comes to life, what is the most important rule to live by? Sounds like a really big deal. So how does Jesus respond? Here's what Jesus says. Jesus says, the most important one is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. And maybe you've heard churches or other Christians paraphrase this passage as saying, well, Jesus says that the two greatest commands are to love God and love others. And when I hear that paraphrase, the problem with it is missing a really important component. Because Jesus doesn't just say, love God and love others. Jesus says, love God and love others as yourself. Because it's true, it's just true that we can't love others well if we don't also have a healthy view of self. And so I think really the paraphrase would be, love God, love self, love others. And if that's the case, that we can't have a healthy view of others without having a healthy view of self, and all of that falls under our view of God, then I think this is the most important factor when it comes to pursuing romantic relationships. Right? If you don't have a healthy view of God, self, and others, your relationships are going to be a nightmare. And so this is kind of how I want to look at this. And I want to start off with this idea of self. And I've got this old friend that I've grown up with. And a while back, he and his wife went through kind of this rough patch together. And when I was talking to him about this, he said that while they were going through this, he also took some time to really, do some work getting to know himself. And it was interesting talking to him because he said, I've never really taken time to do that before, to really learn about myself and how I operate. And he said, I'm learning all of these things about myself that I never knew before. And as we were talking through that, it was interesting because in that moment, the conversation was kind of like, that's awesome. Better late than never with that. But also it made me think, if we had taken the time to really understand ourselves and know ourselves and understand how we work before we entered into these types of relationships, how much heartache would we save both ourselves and the other people that we're in relationships with? How much would we save, right? How much better would he have made sure to take care of his mental and emotional and spiritual health if he understood his strengths, his weaknesses, how he operated? Would he have maybe considered differently the person or the people that he entered into relationships with if he knew these things about himself first? See, guys, the problem is so many of us boys rush into relationships right away, right? We rush into it as soon as possible, and we never really take the time to answer the question, who am I? How do I work? How do I think? What am I about? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And instead, so many guys define themselves through their relationships, and at some point, this really messes things up. And this question, who am I, is something we're answering throughout our whole lives, but it's especially a huge focus during our junior high and high school years. This question, who am I? And you need to take time to discover that for yourself. And one of the things I want to hammer home so hard is that to do that well, we first have to be content with being single. And so many of you are really bad at that. one of the things I've found myself saying to people of all ages, but especially students, over and over again, is that you are not ready to date someone until you're perfectly fine not dating anyone at all. Right? You're not really ready to date someone until you're perfectly fine not dating anyone at all. And I see so many guys jump from one relationship to the next because they don't know who they are without a girlfriend. And when you find that much identity in a relationship, you're actually the worst possible guy for a girl to date. You're the worst possible person for a girl to date. But it's not just that we have to know ourselves, it's that we have to have a healthy view of that self. We have to have a healthy view of that self. And I usually see that with guys looking one of two ways. For some guys, they really struggle with a low view of themselves. They have a really low view of themselves. They have these deep insecurities. They lack self-worth. And if this is where you're at, and you enter into a relationship with a girl, you have this kind of view of yourself, you are going to constantly look to her to make you feel less insecure. You're going to look to her to make you feel worth. You're going to look to her to make you feel loved. And girls, I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship with a guy like that before, but it's exhausting. It's exhausting. It's unfair. It's not your job to do that for another person. Guys, you cannot put your view of yourself on someone else. It's not something that they can carry. She shouldn't have to walk on eggshells every time she's around you, because if she says just the wrong thing or does just the wrong thing, it's going to set off all your insecurities. And some of you, if you're honest, you have really good reasons to feel that way. There are things that have happened in your life that aren't your fault. And if that's the case, I'm sorry. I wish it wasn't that way. And I'm not saying that because that happened, no one should date you, but I'm saying that if that's you, you need to take time to heal and get to a healthy point in your view of self before you can be healthy in a relationship. But some guys have the opposite problem of this. With some guys, it's not that they have a low view of themselves, but it's that you think you are God's gift to this world. Maybe you have met a guy like this before, girls. And here's the thing. Like, you think all the girls should be lining up to date you. And if you enter into a relationship with a girl and you have this kind of view of yourself, you are going to view her as beneath you. You will think you deserve things in the relationship because, after all, she is just so lucky to be in a relationship with you, right? But this is not the type of person that should be in a dating relationship. And unfortunately, so many girls will still choose to be in relationships with guys like this. But they deserve way better. They deserve way better than that. Trust me, boys, I love you, but I know the majority of you, and you are not as cool as you think you are. You're just not, okay? Trust me. And so until you experience some humility, you have no business being in a relationship with a girl. Guys, hear me out on this. Hear me out. Before we should even consider being in a relationship, we have to understand who we are. We have to have a healthy view of ourselves. And any girl that we date or one day marry deserves a guy who is healthy and whole and someone who treats them as an equal partner. And it's only when we're operating out of wholeness and health that we can do that well. But it's not just enough to have a healthy view of ourselves. We also have to have a healthy view of other people. See, I've got this other friend that I also grew up with. And in high school, he started dating this other girl. They were both my friends. And they dated for a long time, and then they ended up even getting married out of that. And their marriage seemed to be going great until suddenly it wasn't. And she came to him and she told him that she wanted to get a divorce. And this really caught him off guard and was unexpected to him. But in hindsight, if you looked back at the relationship, it really should not have been that unexpected for him. Because since the beginning of the relationship, if I'm honest, even as an outsider looking in, it had always been all about him. They did whatever he wanted to do. They did not do whatever he did not want to do. He was more of a homebody, so they always hung out with family instead of going out with friends. He didn't really like to go outside his comfort zone, so they never traveled or did exciting things. And eventually his wife felt like she had no life, and so she left him in order to get one. And at that point, he tried to save the marriage, but she was so bitter and had her mind so made up that there was nothing he could do. It was over. And ultimately, the thing that ruined that relationship was selfishness. Selfishness. And guys, when it comes to how we view girls, the number one thing I see that causes so many problems is selfishness. Too often, we look to girls for what they can do for us or what we can get out of them, but viewing other people that way causes so much damage. Men, listen to this very clearly. She is not an object. She's not an object. I'm tired of hearing guys talk about girls as if they are things instead of people. I'm over it. She's not just a body that exists for you to use and then move on from. She's not a number to add to your list. She's not just an experience to be bragged about. She is a person, not an object. And men, she is not a challenge. I'm also tired of hearing guys talk about girls as if they're some challenge to be completed. And this goes back to your view of self, because we're either so full of ourselves or we're so down on ourselves that it becomes our mission to get her to like me. She's not interested? Well, that's just more motivation, right? Becomes all about winning. And then when we win, the thrill of the chase is over. We're on to the next thing. She's not a challenge. She's a human, and messing with her emotions just so that you can feel better about yourself is wrong, and it's selfish. The number one problem I see with guys in relationships is selfishness. And how do I know if they're making it all about them? Here's some things. This list is not exhaustive, but guys, if you feel yourself checking some things off this list, or girls, if the guy you're with is checking some things off this list, maybe it's a sign that you are a person or are with a person who is selfish. If there's constant pressuring, guys, when you get together with that girl, and from the time you first meet up, there is one thing on your mind once you get together, and nothing else matters besides that one thing, and you are going to pressure and pressure and pressure until you get what you want. And in the relationship, once you accomplish one thing, it's never enough. You're always pressuring for more. You're always pressuring to go one step further. She says, no, I don't want to do that, but to you, no doesn't mean no. No means I just need to keep pressuring more times. I just need to push harder. And then eventually, what typically seems to happen is what I hear from the ladies is that they end up doing something that they did not want to do, not because it was what they wanted, but because you wore them down. That is selfish. If it's not pressuring, it's manipulation, right? You find things out about her past, about her emotions, about her personality, and you use them against her. Or you say things like, well, if you really cared about me, if you really loved me, you would fill in the blank. Or, well, if you don't, then I'll leave you. I'll go find someone else. Right? Or maybe you try to get less obvious about your manipulation, and it's, well, I'm going to buy her flowers, I'm going to take her on a nice date, I'm going to do all these things nice for her, not because you actually care about her as a human, but because you'll get something out of it. That's manipulation, and it's selfish. Or maybe you're just a bully. A bully. You use your power, your strength to get what you want. You're physical. You may physically hurt them, harm them, put your hands on them, force them to do things, make threats. That is selfish. And then the sneaky selfish thing is that guys use girls to address their insecurities. And when it goes back to that view of self, sometimes the person who acts like they're so full of themselves, the guy who talks themselves up all the time, is really just deeply insecure and is using that as a mask to try to make them feel better about themselves. And so guys use girls to address those insecurities because, if she really likes me, if she's attracted to me, if she does whatever with me, then I feel better about myself. I feel wanted. I feel connected. I feel loved. Right? That is selfish. All of these things are incredibly selfish. It's using a person to get something you want for yourself. So what is the proper view we're supposed to have of people? In Philippians 2, Paul writes this: don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others, but be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out for your interests, but take an interest in others too. Have the same attitude that Jesus Christ had. Guys, we shouldn't be looking at girls for what we can get out of them or what they can do for us. But instead, we should be looking to their interests above our own. And until we have that kind of healthy view of people, we should not be dating anyone. But if we have a healthy view of self, and we have a healthy view of others, then what does it look like to navigate this dating process? And I was kind of thinking through this, like if I could now, knowing everything I know, go back to my 8th grade self and kind of recreate this list, right? What would be the things on it that actually matter? The stuff that was actually important to look for. Because guys, one of the reasons we end up with so many relationship problems is because your list usually only consists of 2 things. Number 1, is she physically attractive? And number 2, does she want to date me back? And if there's a check on both of those things, you're good to go. But what are the real things that you should be looking for? Here's some things that I came up with, and girls, these are some important questions to ask yourself as well. Number 1, can you be friends? Can you be friends? Because here's the thing. If you're saying, you know what, I wouldn't ever actually be friends with her, but she lets me hold her hand, she lets me kiss her, I get to tell people that she's my girlfriend, this is probably not a great relationship to be in. And here's the next question. If you could be friends, are you willing to try that out? Because what I will tell you is most of the best married relationships that I know mine included, started out as friends before they moved to dating. So if you can be friends, why not try it first? Second, how do they talk about themselves? Because it's just as important for her to have a healthy view of self as it is for you to have one. And remember, guys, how I said it's not fair for you to look to her to make you feel less insecure. Well, the reverse is true as well. So how does she talk about herself? Is she always talking negatively about herself, talking down on herself? Is she always fishing for compliments so that she can get herself built up? Do you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells around her? If you do just the wrong thing, say it not just the right way, all of the insecurities are going to come out. A relationship where you're always trying to make up for someone who doesn't have a healthy view of self is exhausting. It's an important question to ask. How does she view men? That's another important question. Does she seem obsessed with men? That's not healthy. Does she always speak negatively of men? That's not healthy either. Does she view men as something to be controlled and manipulated and pressured and bullied? All the things that I said the guy shouldn't be doing either. Right? Just as you need to have a healthy view of women, guys, you should also be with someone who has a healthy view of men. How does she treat her friends? Here's something you should know, boys. How she treats her friends will be a huge indicator of how she will treat you. Her relationship with her friends will be a huge indicator of her relationship with you. Is she constantly in the middle of drama with her friends? Does she regularly talk bad about her friends behind her back? If she gets mad at one of her friends, does she give them the silent treatment, spread rumors, unfollow them on social media? Is she rude to her friends? Does she treat her friends with respect? Her relationship with her friends will be a huge indicator of her relationship with you. 3 more, then we'll be done. As you're looking for girls, are you only focusing on what's temporary? What's temporary? Oh man, she's really popular. Well, what if she stops being? Are you done? Right? Her family has a lot of money. What if they lose it all? Are you out? Right? Well, but how she looks, what if how she looks changes? Are you out at that point? You shouldn't be making decisions on things that are temporary. Then the last 2 are the most important 2. Guys, we are notorious for holding women to standards that we do not hold ourselves to. And you cannot do that in a dating relationship. You cannot say, I'm staying far away from that girl because she just really moves on from one guy to the next, even though you've been with like 4 different girls in the last 6 months. You can't say, well, she's really rude to her friends, even though you're a jerk to your friends. You can't say, oh, she's such a flirt, I can never be with her, even though that's how you exist around everyone else, right? Oh, she gets really bad grades, I need someone who's smarter, even though you're dumb. Okay? You should have standards, but you also need to hold yourself to the same standards that you hold her to. And then the last one that I did not save for last because I just needed to push it in there, but because it's the most important thing, and I want it to be the last thing you hear, is what does she think about Jesus? What does she think about Jesus? When I find out a student has just entered into a new relationship, one of the questions I always ask is, how do they feel about Jesus? And you know what's the number one answer I get? They go to church. They go to a church. Cool. That's a really, really good indicator of how she feels about Jesus, because you know everyone in this room that comes here every week is a super committed follower of Jesus, right? Come on. 2, the second answer I get is, well, you know, they're interested. Like, they're asking some good questions. Never once have I asked a student that question. They're like, yeah, you know what? They're like a really committed follower of Jesus. There's never an answer that I've gotten before. And boys, maybe that's because like you're not doing the work to make sure that a girl who's a committed follower of Jesus would want to date you. That's something to consider as well. Boys, the number one thing on your list for a girl should be, what does she think about Jesus? Not does she ask some good questions about Jesus, not does she go to a church sometimes, but is she a committed follower of Jesus? Because if this one is in line, the rest will tend to follow. So, what are the things that would be on your list? What are the things that should be on your list? Guys, relationships are hard. They're a lot of work, and they can only go well if we have a healthy view of ourselves, healthy view of others, and we operate out of that. Those are true relationship goals. Let's pray together. God, I'm thankful just for who you are and just the model that we have in Jesus of what it looks like to love other people well, and that through Jesus we can also love ourselves well. And I just pray that we would learn how to do that so that we can be in healthy relationships and that we can find people one day to be with, that we can pursue you with together. In your name we pray, amen.